Hello everyone. I hope you're comfortable and ready to listen, maybe lying back with your eyes closing slowly as you drift into a world far removed from ours, a world where the streets are lined with stone, the air smells of smoke and fresh bread, and the chatter of citizens, merchants, and children fills the mornings, afternoons, and evenings alike. I wonder, where are you listening from tonight, and what hour is it where you are? Perhaps it is late and your city is quiet, or maybe the sun is still climbing, and people bustle around, unaware that we are about to step into a day in the life of a teacher in the Roman Empire, someone whose world was full of sounds, smells, rules, lessons, and, surprisingly, small pleasures tucked quietly between the tasks of instructing young minds. In the city of Rome, teachers were known as ludi magistri, or schoolmasters, and while today we might picture them in classrooms with chairs and blackboards, their environment was quite different. Often, they taught in small rooms in private houses or in modest rented spaces, sometimes even under open skies when weather allowed, while their students, mostly boys of various ages, sons of merchants, soldiers, and senators, sat cross-legged on mats or simple wooden benches, their ink-stained tablets in hand, ready to copy letters, words, and lessons that would carry them toward literacy, or at least a functional skill in reading, writing, and speaking in Latin and sometimes Greek. You can almost hear the scratching of styluses on wax tablets, the whispered corrections of pronunciation, the occasional exasperated sigh of a teacher whose patience is tested by a child who refuses to form a letter correctly or who daydreams of gladiators and chariot races instead of grammar and arithmetic. Meals for a teacher were modest. Nothing like the elaborate feasts you might imagine when you think of Roman banquets with roasted peacock or stuffed dormice. A teacher would eat bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps some cheese or leftover vegetables, and occasionally, if fortunate, a bit of salted fish, accompanied by water or diluted wine. Students themselves sometimes carried small pieces of bread or fruit, depending on the family's wealth, and the teacher often shared the little he had, creating a small bond between master and pupil that went beyond mere instruction. And yet, even in these humble settings, there were rules, expectations, and the ever-present hierarchy of Roman society, reminding everyone of their place. A teacher's day began early, often with the rising sun, though many had the luxury of sleeping a little longer in the winter months when daylight arrived later. Upon rising, they would dress in a simple tunic, sometimes covered by a cloak if the weather was cold, and make their way through narrow streets filled with carts, livestock, and the calls of street vendors selling everything from bread to fish, from pottery to scrolls. The journey to the teaching space might be short or long, depending on whether they lived within the city walls or in a nearby suburb, but always it was filled with sights and sounds that were a part of the rhythm of Roman life, a constant reminder that the city itself was a living organism, breathing and shifting with every footstep. Once at their place of instruction, the teacher would begin the morning session with greetings, sometimes a short speech, exhorting the children to listen, to focus, and to remember that their studies were the key to future success. Lessons often started with the alphabet, simple writing exercises, and recitation, but over time, more complex skills were introduced: basic mathematics for accounting and trade, rhetoric for persuasion, and moral tales that illustrated virtues such as courage, honesty, and respect for one's elders and the gods. The teacher often had to be part storyteller, part disciplinarian, and part performer, engaging the young minds while preventing them from wandering off into mischief or boredom. Recess or a short break brought a flurry of activity: children running through the courtyards or streets, tossing a ball or playing a game with sticks, and the teacher, if lucky, taking a brief respite, perhaps enjoying a quiet moment to glance at scrolls or to jot down notes for upcoming lessons. Sometimes, conversations with fellow teachers or neighbors would occur, where news of the city, rumors from the Senate, or gossip about wealthy patrons would be shared in whispers, careful not to disturb the children, but allowing the teacher a small connection to the broader world beyond the schoolroom. Afternoons were often the most challenging. Hunger, fatigue, and restlessness made concentration difficult, yet the teacher persisted. Lessons could be interrupted by minor arguments among pupils, questions about distant lands or events they had overheard from their parents, or sudden excitement at some curious insect crawling across the floor. Teachers had to be quick-thinking, adapting their methods to the needs and moods of the students, sometimes transforming a simple lesson into a story or game that captured attention, reinforcing learning through engagement rather than mere repetition. The evenings brought both relief and reflection. Once the children had been dismissed, the teacher would tidy the space, perhaps reviewing the day's work, marking achievements, or planning for the next day. Occasionally, a teacher would have a small circle of older students who wished to study rhetoric, philosophy, or poetry, and these sessions could stretch late into the evening, with animated discussions and debates under the fading light. And in moments of solitude, walking home through the busy streets, passing by taverns where citizens laughed and argued over wine and olives, a teacher might reflect on the precarious balance of their life. Respected yet modest, engaged with the vibrant city yet bound by its rules, carrying the responsibility of shaping young minds in a society that prized knowledge, discipline, and eloquence, sometimes above comfort or ease. Yet life was not only about work. Teachers, like all Romans, found moments for enjoyment. They might attend public games, visit the baths, or observe festivals where music, dancing, and theatrical performances filled the city with color and sound. Conversations with friends over food and wine allowed them to share stories, jokes, and frustrations, while quiet moments alone offered contemplation, reading, or the pleasure of simply walking beneath the stars and imagining distant lands, perhaps the places mentioned in the scrolls of history or the tales of Greek poets, allowing the mind to wander even as the body rested. And so, the life of a teacher in Rome was an intricate dance of responsibility, endurance, and subtle joys, an existence that demanded patience, knowledge, and creativity, yet offered small, persistent rewards, the understanding nod of a student, the whispered curiosity of a child discovering a new word, the satisfaction of order restored in a chaotic room, and the ever-present awareness that one played a small, yet vital, role in the unfolding story of one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. As the sun climbed higher in the sky the next morning, the city seemed to awaken with renewed vigor, merchants calling out their wares, horses clattering along stone streets, and the smell of baking bread mingling with the faint tang of the Tiber River. For the teacher, mornings were often a race against time, preparing materials while the students arrived in a steady trickle, some clutching wax tablets, others brandishing wooden styluses, all carrying the anticipation, curiosity, or sometimes mischief that marked youth. The small classroom, though modest in size, was filled with potential, each boy a repository of questions, wonder, and the occasional defiance that required both firmness and ingenuity to guide. Lessons began with repetition, a slow and deliberate recitation of letters and words. Yet even in this apparent monotony, there was art. The teacher would illustrate letters by tracing them in the air, speaking slowly, emphasizing rhythm and cadence, and sometimes incorporating small stories about gods, heroes, or animals to make the abstract tangible. Students' eyes would follow, some wide with understanding, others squinting in concentration, their fingers tracing the letters on wax with a mixture of determination and clumsiness. Mistakes were frequent and sometimes frustrating, yet they were part of the rhythm of learning, and the teacher's patience, tested repeatedly, became a quiet testament to endurance and care. Food and nourishment occupied a subtle but significant space in daily life. Lunch, though brief, offered both physical sustenance and social engagement. A teacher might sit quietly, eating bread soaked in olive oil, a handful of dried figs, or a slice of cheese, listening as students shared small stories about their families, market observations, or recent trips to temples or forums. Even a simple meal became a lesson in social order. Children learned manners, the importance of sharing, and the nuances of conversation, while the teacher absorbed tiny details about each pupil's background, wealth, and temperament, which would inform how lessons were delivered, who might need encouragement, and who could grasp more advanced concepts. The afternoons were often the most delicate balance of discipline and engagement. Some students were eager, their hands raised, eyes shining with curiosity, while others fidgeted, whispering to neighbors or staring out the window at the streets below, imagining chariot races or gladiatorial combat. The teacher had to be simultaneously attentive and creative, shifting the pace, changing exercises, telling anecdotes, or incorporating games that reinforced learning without breaking focus. Sometimes, the lessons would drift into ethical discussions, asking questions about justice, courage, or honesty, subtly instilling moral values alongside practical skills. In such moments, the classroom transformed from a simple room into a miniature forum, a space where young minds began to understand the complexity of human behavior, society, and the rules that govern both. In between structured lessons, there were moments that tested a teacher's resolve, arguments over ownership of writing materials, questions that seemed endless, and occasional interruptions from parents or neighbors. Yet these moments also revealed small joys. A student might suddenly exclaim, having finally grasped a difficult concept, or a child might recite a poem or line from a story with unexpected clarity, bringing a quiet satisfaction that spread like warmth through the room. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, the clang of metal from blacksmiths, the calls of fishmongers, the soft laughter of children chasing one another, all blending into a constant soundtrack that the teacher carried in memory, recognizing that life extended beyond the walls of the classroom, yet intertwined with every lesson, every correction, every whispered encouragement. Evening brought the subtle transition from public bustle to private reflection. After the students had left, often with reluctant farewells, the teacher would linger, reviewing notes, preparing lessons, and sometimes engaging in conversation with fellow educators, scholars, or philosophers who had gathered to exchange ideas. Discussions could range from techniques in rhetoric, interpretations of classical texts, or even debates about recent events in Rome, the politics of the Senate, rumors of conspiracies, or accounts of distant provinces. Such exchanges were not only intellectually stimulating but also a necessary connection to the broader currents of Roman life, ensuring that teaching remained relevant, informed, and enriched by lived experience. Yet even in these moments of learning and social interaction, life offered subtler pleasures. Walking home through lantern-lit streets, the teacher might pause to watch a street performer juggling or reciting poetry, smell the faint smoke of evening fires, or hear the distant murmur of the forum where late-night discussions or gossip continued. Dinner might be simple: bread, olives, perhaps a bit of boiled lentils or leftover vegetables, but it was a space for thought, reflection, and occasionally conversation with family or friends. Quiet contemplation, reading a scroll, or composing notes for future lessons allowed the teacher to carry the day's experiences inward, weaving them into a fabric that would shape both personal understanding and the next day's instruction. Recreation and leisure, though limited, were intertwined with cultural and religious life. Teachers, like other citizens, sometimes visited baths, places not only for cleanliness but for socialization, relaxation, and observation of human behavior. Festivals offered spectacles of music, dance, and performance, a break from routine, yet often infused with moral or historical storytelling that could later inform lessons. Even short walks offered insight, observing children playing, merchants bargaining, or citizens debating, providing endless examples to illustrate lessons on ethics, society, and human nature. A teacher's life was both immersed in instruction and simultaneously enriched by the vibrant, intricate tapestry of the city itself. And so, the rhythm of teaching continued, a blend of duty, creativity, endurance, and subtle enjoyment, each day presenting challenges, discoveries, and fleeting moments of triumph. Life in the Roman Empire was rigorous, demanding, yet filled with texture, sensation, and variety, a combination that shaped both teacher and pupil, intertwining the practicalities of daily existence with the broader, unfolding narrative of culture, knowledge, and human experience. In this way, even the simplest acts, writing a letter, reciting a poem, sharing a loaf of bread, became threads in a larger story, one that connected individuals across time, space, and circumstance, and that, for the teacher, was both vocation and adventure, responsibility and curiosity, labor and quiet joy. The following morning, light spilled into narrow streets, painting uneven shadows across stone walls, and the city awoke with the same familiar symphony of clanging metal, barking dogs, and the soft murmurs of vendors setting up their stalls. The teacher stepped into this familiar rhythm, adjusting his simple tunic, brushing dust from his sandals, and carrying his small bundle of wax tablets and writing implements, each piece worn and polished from repeated use, each mark a reminder of countless lessons, scribbled corrections, and memorized speeches. The streets themselves seemed to shape the day, children darting between legs of pedestrians, merchants arranging olives or bread, and the faint tang of fish lingering near the river. Even a brief delay, the stumble of a cart, or the shout of a market boy could shift the teacher's mood, a subtle reminder that in Rome, life demanded alertness, even in the smallest details. As students arrived, a wave of energy swept through the room. Some carried neat bundles of styluses and wax tablets, others clutched scraps of parchment, and a few simply came empty-handed, trusting their memory or hoping to borrow materials from a friend. The teacher, accustomed to this flux, greeted each pupil individually, noting who seemed particularly energetic, who appeared distracted, and who might require gentle encouragement or a firmer hand. The first exercises were usually simple, reciting letters, forming words, or copying sentences, but even this routine held possibilities for creativity. Occasionally, the teacher would alter a phrase, inserting a story or question that sparked imagination, a reference to a gladiator's courage, the flight of birds over the forum, or a tale of Roman gods that illustrated patience, wisdom, or mischief. Students responded differently. Some leaned forward, eyes wide and fixed, while others fidgeted, whispering to neighbors or glancing out the window, but all were connected in that shared, unfolding experience of learning. Lessons moved naturally into arithmetic and practical skills, essential for young Romans destined to participate in commerce, governance, or military planning. Counting on fingers, grouping pebbles, or marking numbers on wax tablets might seem mundane, yet the teacher imbued each exercise with context. How a merchant calculated profits, how a soldier tallied supplies, or how an official recorded votes in the Senate. These practical applications created subtle excitement, bridging the abstract and the tangible. A student's sudden realization, the spark of comprehension, was a reward unlike any other, a small victory celebrated with a nod, a smile, or a whispered word of encouragement, all quietly observed by classmates and forming an invisible web of connection across the classroom. Meals, though simple, remained a crucial rhythm in the day. Bread, cheese, olives, sometimes dried fruit, or leftover vegetables from the market sustained the teacher, while students often shared what they had brought or purchased. These moments, while brief, allowed for conversation, subtle observation, and the sharing of stories. A child might describe a parent's business in the forum, a festival witnessed the previous week, or a quarrel with a neighbor, and the teacher, listening carefully, noted not only details for later anecdotes but also small moral lessons that could be gently woven into upcoming instruction. Social understanding was as much a part of education as reading or writing, and every interaction, no matter how brief, contributed to the cultivation of awareness, patience, and empathy. Afternoons often presented the greatest challenges and, paradoxically, the greatest rewards. Restlessness built as the sun reached its zenith, yet this was also the time when curiosity could ignite most vividly. A question about a distant province, a rumor of military conquest, or an anecdote overheard from a parent could disrupt the structured lesson, requiring the teacher to improvise. A simple writing exercise might transform into a story about Roman engineering, or arithmetic might expand into a problem-solving challenge involving hypothetical trade across the Mediterranean. These improvisations demanded creativity, patience, and adaptability, but they also deepened engagement, cemented knowledge, and, in subtle ways, strengthened the bond between master and pupil. Even the discipline, though demanding, carried its own lessons. Minor quarrels over materials, whispered disagreements, or debates about the fairness of rules were opportunities for teaching social conduct, negotiation, and respect. The teacher's role extended beyond letters and numbers. It encompassed guidance on manners, moral reasoning, and observation of the broader social order. Encouraging reflection on actions, consequences, and virtues transformed what could be perceived as mundane rules into enduring lessons about life itself, teaching students to navigate both the classroom and the wider world with thoughtfulness, dignity, and prudence. As the day progressed, moments of quiet reflection allowed the teacher to consider the subtle patterns of human behavior unfolding before him. Some students were naturally curious, asking questions that revealed imagination and intelligence. Others were diligent, persistent, and careful in their execution. Still others were mischievous, testing limits, experimenting with language, or observing reactions. Each child represented not only potential but also a challenge, a puzzle, and an opportunity for the teacher to refine technique, encourage effort, and cultivate a balanced understanding of both learning and life. Observing these differences, adjusting lessons, and creating opportunities for growth became an art form, a delicate interplay of instruction, observation, and personal insight. Evenings offered a different rhythm, a blend of work, reflection, and leisure. After dismissing students, the teacher might walk through the streets, noticing the transition from the bustle of markets to the quieter hum of families gathered for dinner, taverns alive with conversation, and the faint glow of oil lamps in windows, each scene a fragment of life to consider, reflect upon, and integrate into teaching and personal understanding. Dinner at home could be a quiet affair, simple yet satisfying, often accompanied by the reading of scrolls, composing of lesson plans, or the occasional visit from colleagues or neighbors, exchanging news, ideas, or advice, forming an informal network of intellectual and social support. Religious observances, cultural festivals, and public spectacles also punctuated life. Teachers, like other citizens, participated in rituals, attended temple ceremonies, or observed games and performances, integrating these experiences into lessons or personal reflection. Stories of gods, heroes, and historical figures were not merely entertainment. They were teaching tools, sources of moral and practical insight, and reminders of the rich tapestry of human experience. Each festival, each ritual, and each public event offered opportunities to connect the classroom to the broader cultural context, to inspire, and to anchor lessons in the living world. By mid-morning, the streets outside had become a lively mosaic of sounds, colors, and motion, and the teacher, moving along narrow lanes lined with stone buildings, could already hear the distant calls of street vendors selling fresh bread and salted fish, the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith hammering iron, and the occasional bray of a donkey carrying goods from the market. The energy of Rome was contagious, yet there was always a subtle tension in the air, a sense that time and attention were finite, and the teacher had to prepare himself for the unpredictable patterns of the day ahead, balancing anticipation with patience and routine with creativity. Once inside the teaching space, the morning unfolded in waves of interaction, each child carrying not only questions and curiosity but also fragments of the larger world outside. Rumors of soldiers returning from distant provinces, news from the forum, tales of exotic animals in the circus, and whispered stories of gladiators who had risen to fame, fallen to misfortune, or challenged conventions in ways that captured imaginations. The teacher, always attentive, found ways to weave these fragments into lessons, transforming them into exercises in reading, arithmetic, or moral reasoning, demonstrating how knowledge and observation could converge in daily life. Children's curiosity often extended beyond textbooks. Questions arose spontaneously: what is it like in Egypt? Or, how do the senators choose their leaders? Or even, could a slave become free if he was clever enough? The teacher, guiding without overwhelming, would answer with a mixture of fact, caution, and narrative flourish, sometimes recounting historical anecdotes, sometimes constructing hypotheticals that allowed students to explore possibilities, consequences, and ethics. Each question was an opportunity for subtle teaching, a moment to instill critical thinking, patience, and reflection, reminding students that learning was not merely memorization but a pathway to understanding the complex world around them. Meals remained modest yet significant, a time for sustenance and observation. A small loaf of bread, a smear of olive oil, a piece of dried fruit, and occasionally some cheese were staples for both teacher and students. Beyond nourishment, these moments offered glimpses into family life, social status, and the diversity of experiences that each child brought to the room. Sharing a slice of bread, listening to brief stories of markets, siblings, or pets, and noting how each child interacted with peers provided insight into temperament, social skill, and potential approaches to instruction, making these pauses an integral part of the educational process. Afternoons brought both challenge and discovery. Some students arrived with boundless energy, ready to question, argue, and explore. Others struggled with focus, distracted by noises from outside or by their own imagination. The teacher adapted fluidly, sometimes changing an exercise midstream, sometimes weaving storytelling into arithmetic or ethics lessons, or transforming a repetitive writing exercise into a dramatic recitation. These improvisations were not merely tactical, they were essential to sustaining attention, nurturing curiosity, and allowing children to experience the joy of learning as something dynamic, personal, and engaging. Discipline, when necessary, was subtle but firm. A quarrel over a stylus, a whispered argument, or an attempt to copy a neighbor's work became an opportunity to teach respect, fairness, and self-control. The teacher's methods were never harsh in excess. Instead, they relied on careful observation, quiet admonition, and guided correction, shaping behavior as much as intellect. Over time, students began to internalize expectations, learning that attention, honesty, and effort were not mere rules but principles that influenced daily life, relationships, and the broader society in which they would grow. The teacher's personal life intertwined with the rhythms of instruction. Walks through the city after lessons offered both reflection and inspiration, observing citizens, festivals, or merchants negotiating in the forum, listening to debates about politics, law, or religion, and noting how children imitated or learned from these broader social interactions. Evenings were often quiet and introspective, filled with the preparation of lessons, study of texts, and occasional visits from colleagues or friends, sharing news, gossip, or philosophical discussion. These moments nurtured both the mind and spirit, balancing the intensity of teaching with engagement in the rich cultural life of Rome. Occasionally, the teacher found respite in baths, a practice both hygienic and social, offering relaxation, conversation, and observation. Listening to others recount events, offering advice, or debating ethical questions provided intellectual stimulation, as well as insight into the broader context of the empire. Similarly, festivals punctuated the year, offering music, performance, and spectacle, while also presenting subtle lessons in religion, morality, and civic pride. Teachers could draw upon these experiences in the classroom, enriching lessons with cultural reference, ethical illustration, and narrative depth. As days flowed into weeks, the teacher became increasingly attuned to the rhythms of student energy, the changing seasons, and the nuances of the city. Each child's growth, each insight, each small triumph became a subtle thread in the tapestry of teaching, a record not written in ink alone but in attention, care, and shared experience. Life was demanding yet vibrant, filled with sights, sounds, smells, interactions, and small victories that compounded into a slow but steady sense of purpose. Evenings were a mixture of relief and reflection, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city shifted from bustling commerce to domestic calm. Lamps glowed faintly in windows, distant voices murmured across streets, and the occasional music from a festival or private gathering carried through alleys. Dinner remained simple: bread, cheese, perhaps lentils or vegetables, accompanied by quiet contemplation, reading, or the drafting of lesson plans. Walking home through these lantern-lit streets offered small pleasures, glimpses of domestic life, overheard conversations, the scent of cooking fires, or the laughter of children still at play. Each of these fragments enriched understanding, patience, and creativity, providing experiences to draw upon in lessons and reflections alike. And so, the life of a Roman teacher continued, a delicate balance of labor, observation, adaptation, and subtle enjoyment, each day an unfolding narrative rich in detail, rhythm, and nuance. In every lesson delivered, every question answered, and every moment observed, the teacher participated in a larger story, that of Rome itself, of society, culture, education, and the human experience, capturing the texture, complexity, and enduring fascination of a life devoted to both knowledge and the delicate art of guiding young minds through the labyrinth of learning, behavior, and the infinite small discoveries that made each day unique. Morning arrived once again, soft light spilling across the rooftops, highlighting the worn stones of the streets and the colorful awnings of market stalls, and the teacher moved with practiced rhythm, sandals echoing lightly against the paving, wax tablets and styluses in hand, already anticipating the chorus of questions, laughter, and occasional quarrels that would greet him upon entering the classroom. Each day brought the familiar challenges of attention, energy, and curiosity, but also the subtle variations that made each lesson distinct, each student's personality revealed in gestures, tones, and the way their eyes followed words as they were traced across wax or spoken aloud. As students arrived, some with books and materials neatly bundled, others clutching scraps of parchment or nothing at all, the teacher greeted each individually, observing closely, noting details. A new scar from a scrape on the street, a sudden enthusiasm in a question about faraway lands, a hesitation in writing letters that suggested fatigue or distraction. The classroom, though simple, was alive with texture and potential, every movement, scratch of a stylus, and whispered question contributing to an ever-changing tableau. In this space, letters became more than symbols, numbers more than figures. Lessons were moments of discovery, miniature dramas in which the teacher guided, observed, and sometimes participated as storyteller, disciplinarian, and confidant. Early exercises began with letters and words, as always, but the teacher had learned to weave layers of engagement into even the simplest tasks. He would trace letters in the air, speak them aloud with rhythm and intonation, occasionally slipping in a brief tale about a god, a hero, or a civic figure to capture attention. Students leaned forward, eyes bright with comprehension or curiosity, while others scribbled furiously, striving to reproduce the shape, balance, and form demanded by Latin and Greek characters. Mistakes were frequent and expected, and the teacher, with practiced patience, corrected errors quietly, sometimes guiding the hand, sometimes encouraging self-discovery, knowing that understanding, not rote copying, was the goal. Arithmetic followed, often presented as a practical exercise rather than abstract computation. Pebbles, coins, and pieces of wax would become tools to illustrate trade, taxation, or distribution, allowing students to imagine themselves in marketplaces or administrative offices, counting wares, calculating profits, or planning provisions. Some pupils excelled naturally, their minds quick with numbers and logic, while others struggled, their fingers fumbling over calculations, yet the teacher adapted fluidly, creating variations in problems, weaving in stories of merchants, engineers, or soldiers who had to apply such skills, ensuring that learning remained dynamic, relevant, and memorable. Meals punctuated the day, modest but meaningful, bread dipped in olive oil, a small piece of cheese, occasionally a bit of dried fruit, and sometimes a sip of diluted wine or water. These brief intervals were more than nourishment. They were observation, socialization, and subtle instruction in manners and conversation. Students recounted snippets of family life, neighborhood events, or observations of markets, temples, or the city beyond, and the teacher listened carefully, noting temperament, curiosity, and social understanding, sometimes weaving these details into later lessons as examples, questions, or discussion points, making the classroom a microcosm of the larger world. Afternoons carried the weight of both challenge and opportunity. Energy waned, restlessness increased, and the teacher had to improvise, shifting exercises, telling short stories, or incorporating games that reinforced concepts while sustaining attention. A question about a distant province, an anecdote from a festival, or a rumor of political intrigue might become a lesson in geography, history, or ethics. These moments required constant attentiveness, creativity, and a subtle sense of timing, ensuring that engagement remained high, that students learned through curiosity rather than compulsion, and that the dynamic of the classroom remained fluid, responsive, and alive. Discipline was rarely harsh, yet always present. Minor disputes over materials, whispered arguments, or attempts to copy from neighbors became lessons in fairness, honesty, and respect. The teacher observed closely, intervening where necessary with quiet firmness, guiding reflection, and allowing students to understand consequences without humiliation. Over time, these interventions shape behavior as effectively as instruction in letters or numbers, teaching children the social and ethical skills necessary to navigate both the classroom and the wider Roman world. Personal reflection and observation remained a constant companion. Walks through the city after lessons offered both relaxation and insight. observing citizens, artisans, or merchants, listening to conversations, noting the patterns of daily life, and seeing how children might interpret or imitate these behaviors. Evenings were spent quietly, preparing lessons, reading scrolls, reflecting on students' progress, or visiting colleagues to discuss philosophy, rhetoric, or teaching methods. These routines reinforced a sense of purpose, connected the teacher to the broader intellectual and cultural life of Rome, and provided space for contemplation, creativity, and subtle enjoyment. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and public games punctuated the year. Teachers attended when possible, observing rituals, performances, and crowds, noting behaviors, storytelling techniques, and human interactions. Each spectacle offered material for future lessons. Tales of gods, moral dilemmas, historical events, or social dynamics could be integrated into classroom exercises, enriching instruction with cultural depth and illustrating the practical application of ethics, eloquence, and civic understanding. Even in simple routines, writing letters, calculating sums, listening to questions, the teacher found purpose, challenge, and small victories. The growth of students, the spark of comprehension, the unfolding of social skill, and the quiet satisfaction of order restored after chaos were subtle, yet profound, rewards. Life in the Roman Empire demanded endurance, attention, and creativity, yet it offered texture, discovery, and connection, weaving the daily tasks of teaching into the larger story of civilization, culture, and the shared human experience that extended far beyond the classroom walls. And so, the teacher's days continued, each a complex interweaving of instruction, observation, improvisation, reflection, and quiet joy, contributing not only to personal growth and satisfaction but also to the cultivation of young minds, social understanding, and the enduring rhythms of one of history's most remarkable cities. Each student, each lesson, each brief triumph or failure was a thread in a larger tapestry, rich with detail, challenge, and subtle, enduring reward, shaping both the teacher and those in his care as part of the continuing, living story of Rome. The following day dawned with a crisp clarity that made the stone streets shimmer in the early light, dust particles dancing in beams of sun filtering between buildings, while the soft murmur of early vendors preparing their stalls filled the air. The teacher moved along familiar paths, observing the city already in motion, a baker kneading dough, the sharp scent of olives and fresh herbs blending in the warm morning air, and children darting between adults with laughter and occasional shrieks of play. Each detail, each movement, each sound was absorbed, catalogued, and sometimes transformed into small lessons or anecdotes to be shared later with students. Arriving at the classroom, the teacher greeted each pupil individually, noting minor changes. A new garment that suggested a small gift from a parent, the lingering shadow of a scraped knee from yesterday's misadventures, or a spark of enthusiasm in the eyes of a student particularly eager to ask a question about distant lands or Roman history. The students, carrying wax tablets, styluses, and bits of parchment, were the vessels into which knowledge, guidance, and subtle wisdom would flow, yet each brought individuality, curiosity, and unpredictable energy that required careful attention, adaptability, and sometimes quick improvisation from the teacher. Lessons began with letters, basic words, and writing exercises, yet the teacher always sought ways to add texture and interest. He might tell a brief story of a Roman consul or a mythological hero to illustrate the sound of a particular letter, or incorporate a small riddle to engage thinking while practicing script. Students leaned forward, fingers tracing letters on wax, eyes darting between peers and teacher, while whispers and occasional giggles punctuated the quiet focus. Errors were corrected gently, sometimes by guiding a hand, sometimes by encouraging self-discovery, and each correction was a subtle affirmation of the student's potential, reinforcing both skill and confidence. Arithmetic followed, often applied to practical problems rather than abstract numbers. Pebbles, pieces of wood, or small tokens became tools to illustrate trade, measurement, and accounting, allowing children to imagine themselves as merchants, tax collectors, or minor officials. Some pupils excelled naturally, displaying quick comprehension and enthusiasm, while others struggled, requiring patience, repetition, and creative explanation. The teacher adapted exercises fluidly, incorporating stories of real or hypothetical situations in markets, temples, or military logistics, ensuring that each lesson connected learning to the practical world and remained engaging rather than purely rote. Breaks and meals were small but significant events. Bread, cheese, olives, and occasionally dried fruit or lentils nourished the body, while conversations nourished the mind and social understanding. Students shared snippets of family life, neighborhood events, or observations of festivals and markets, and the teacher listened carefully, noting temperament, curiosity, and social skill. Occasionally, a pupil would recount a minor scandal or rumor, and the teacher might use it to illustrate lessons in morality, fairness, or civic responsibility, blending real life with instruction seamlessly. Afternoons brought a different tempo, requiring vigilance, creativity, and flexibility. Energy ebbed, restlessness grew, and some students became argumentative or distracted. The teacher had to improvise, transforming arithmetic into story problems, grammar exercises into debates about ethics or civic duty, and writing drills into short imaginative compositions. These improvisations were not merely tactical, they were essential to maintain engagement, inspire curiosity, and develop reasoning. Moments of insight or enthusiasm were celebrated quietly, reinforcing learning and fostering connection, while challenges were addressed with patience, subtle humor, or gentle correction. Discipline, always present but never excessively harsh, was applied with observation and understanding. A dispute over a stylus, an attempt to copy a neighbor's work, or a moment of misbehavior became opportunities to teach fairness, self-control, and ethical reflection. Students gradually internalized expectations, learning that attention, honesty, and effort were not merely rules but principles with real-world consequences. The teacher observed each student's growth with care, noting progress, understanding temperament, and adapting instruction to suit needs and potential. Evenings offered moments of quiet reflection. After dismissing pupils, the teacher often walked through streets now subdued, lit by lanterns and punctuated by the distant murmur of taverns and conversations. Observing life outside the classroom, merchants tallying accounts, families gathering for dinner, travelers moving through the forum, offered both relaxation and subtle inspiration. Dinner at home was simple, often bread, cheese, and vegetables, accompanied by quiet contemplation, reading, or writing lesson plans. Occasional visits from colleagues or friends brought conversation, news, and debate, enriching personal and professional life while providing context for teaching. Festivals, public games, and religious observances punctuated the routine, offering entertainment, cultural education, and moral lessons. Teachers attended when possible, noting rituals, performances, and human interactions to incorporate into classroom instruction. Tales of gods, civic heroes, or historical events became fodder for storytelling, discussion, and critical thinking exercises. Students learned not only letters, numbers, and rhetoric but also social norms, ethical reasoning, and the rhythms of civic and religious life, experiencing education as a holistic, living process rather than isolated exercises. The city itself, with its constant motion, commerce, and social variety, was an ever-present teacher. Watching children play in the streets, merchants negotiate, or citizens debate, the teacher drew lessons in human behavior, patience, and communication. Even small interactions, observing a disagreement between siblings, a child sharing bread with a friend, or a neighbor performing a helpful act, provided examples for classroom discussion, emphasizing the interconnectedness of personal behavior, social ethics, and civic responsibility. And so, day after day, the life of a Roman teacher continued, a delicate balance of labor, observation, improvisation, and subtle enjoyment. Each moment, writing letters, performing arithmetic, correcting errors, guiding moral reflection, or walking through the streets after lessons, was a thread in a larger tapestry. The teacher's existence, embedded within the rhythm of the city, the growth of pupils, and the unfolding story of Rome, revealed a life rich in detail, challenge, and small, enduring rewards, shaping both the teacher and the young minds entrusted to his care while connecting intimately with the broader currents of culture, learning, and human experience. The morning sun filtered through narrow streets once again, illuminating the uneven cobblestones and the brightly colored awnings of the market stalls. The teacher moved through the familiar rhythm of the city, wax tablets and styluses tucked under his arm, ears attuned to the mixture of sounds, the distant clatter of a horse-drawn cart, the sharp ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the cries of vendors touting fresh fruit, and the laughter of children weaving between pedestrians. Each sound, each gesture, each fragment of life was a potential lesson, a story, or a moral weighting to be drawn into the day's teaching. Upon entering the classroom, the teacher greeted each student individually, noting subtle changes in posture, mood, or attire. A boy with an unusually neat tunic suggested a family celebration, while another, rubbing a small scrape on his arm, hinted at a minor adventure or misadventure from the streets. The small room filled gradually, wax tablets and writing implements clattering softly as children arranged themselves into familiar positions. Eyes gleamed with curiosity, some pupils eager to recite letters or numbers, others fidgeting with anticipation or mischief, ready to test boundaries or ask the questions that might momentarily derail the lesson yet enrich it in unexpected ways. The morning began with writing exercises, letters and syllables forming the foundation of literacy, but even these basic drills were transformed into dynamic moments. The teacher traced letters in the air, emphasizing shape, rhythm, and pronunciation, sometimes integrating short anecdotes of gods, heroes, or historical events. Students leaned forward, tracing letters on their wax tablets, voices murmuring as they recited aloud, sometimes correctly, sometimes hesitantly, and always with small errors that required subtle correction. Every misstep became an opportunity for instruction, patience, and encouragement, demonstrating that mastery was less a destination than a journey shaped by persistence, attention, and curiosity. Arithmetic followed, often rooted in practical scenarios. Pebbles, pieces of wood, or small coins became tools to explore trade, measurement, and planning. Students calculated profits for merchants, rations for soldiers, or the distribution of goods during festivals, connecting abstract numbers to real-life applications. Some pupils grasped concepts quickly, their faces lighting up with comprehension, while others hesitated, requiring additional explanation or imaginative examples. The teacher adapted fluidly, embedding lessons in narrative or hypothetical scenarios, ensuring that learning was active, relevant, and memorable rather than purely mechanical. Meals punctuated the day, simple yet meaningful. Bread, olives, cheese, or dried fruit sustained the body while conversation nourished social understanding. Students shared stories of family routines, neighborhood gossip, or observations from markets or festivals. The teacher listened carefully, noting personalities, familial structures, and subtle dynamics, sometimes weaving these insights into classroom discussions or moral lessons. Observing students outside structured lessons offered invaluable insight into temperament, curiosity, and emerging social awareness, enriching both instruction and interpersonal guidance. Afternoons required both patience and creativity. Energy waned, restlessness grew, and minor conflicts emerged, disputes over writing implements, whispered arguments, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. The teacher used these moments as lessons in fairness, ethical conduct, and reflection, guiding students towards self-awareness and understanding of social norms. Instruction sometimes shifted spontaneously. Arithmetic became a story problem about merchants, grammar exercises incorporated questions of civic duty, and reading drills transformed into discussions about historical events, mythology, or ethical dilemmas. These improvisations ensured sustained engagement, intellectual curiosity, and moral development. The social dynamics of the classroom were complex and fascinating. Friendships, rivalries, and alliances formed subtly among students, influencing participation, behavior, and motivation. Some pupils vied for attention, attempting to impress the teacher with rapid answers or neat handwriting, while others relied on observation, learning quietly and carefully. Occasionally, minor conflicts arose over resources, recognition, or perceived unfairness, and these became opportunities for the teacher to instill negotiation skills, empathy, and understanding, teaching not only letters and numbers but also the intricate patterns of human interaction. The The teacher's personal routines intertwined seamlessly with professional obligations. Walks through the city after lessons offered both relaxation and reflection. Observing artisans at work, merchants negotiating in the forum, or citizens engaged in debate provided endless material for classroom examples. Evenings were a mixture of quiet preparation, reading scrolls, composing lesson plans, and engaging in conversation with colleagues or friends. These interactions offered intellectual stimulation, shared insight, and subtle social networking, enriching both personal life and pedagogical technique. Festivals, religious rituals, and public spectacles punctuated the calendar. Attendance, when possible, provided vivid examples for lessons. Tales of gods, heroes, civic heroes, or historical events became fodder for ethical discussions, debates, or imaginative exercises. Students learned not only letters, numbers, and rhetoric but also social norms, ethical reasoning, and cultural literacy, experiencing education as a living, holistic process embedded in the rhythms of Roman life. Even in the repetition of routine, writing letters, counting pebbles, or correcting minor errors, life offered texture and subtle reward. The spark of understanding in a student's eyes, the quiet satisfaction of restored order after conflict, or the realization that a lesson had taken root were small yet profound triumphs. The teacher, immersed in the vibrant and challenging life of the city, the growth of pupils, and the intricate weave of human behavior, found both purpose and quiet pleasure, a rhythm of effort, observation, and subtle joy that defined daily existence. Thus, the life of a Roman teacher continued, a delicate and intricate balance of instruction, observation, improvisation, reflection, and engagement with both human and civic life. Each moment, correcting a letter, solving a problem, guiding moral reasoning, or walking through the lantern-lit streets after lessons, was part of a larger narrative, weaving together personal growth, student development, and the living pulse of the city itself. The teacher's days were dense with experience, subtle victories, and ongoing discovery, a living tapestry of education, society, and the enduring patterns of life in one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The morning light spilled over the rooftops, casting long shadows along the uneven streets, while the distant hum of commerce, the rhythmic pounding of a smith's hammer, and the faint scent of freshly baked bread combined into a living orchestra that accompanied the teacher on his way to the classroom. Each day, the city revealed new details: a merchant arguing over a price, a child chasing a stray dog, or a courier dashing past with letters tied in bundles, each event an opportunity to observe human behavior, understand social nuance, or later illustrate lessons about responsibility, civility, or commerce. The teacher walked deliberately, mind already organizing the day's exercises and anticipating the subtle challenges and delights that awaited within the classroom walls. Upon arrival, the classroom slowly filled, each child arriving with unique energy, expression, and expectation. Some carried meticulously prepared wax tablets and styluses, while others came with tattered parchment or nothing at all, relying on borrowed tools or memory. The teacher greeted each one, noting minor changes: the fatigue from yesterday's games, the excitement of a family celebration, or the curiosity sparked by a recent festival or marketplace observation. These details shaped instruction, helping the teacher tailor exercises, anticipate questions, and maintain engagement in a group whose personalities ranged from quiet, contemplative thinkers to boisterous, adventurous spirits eager to test boundaries and explore the limits of attention. The morning lessons began with writing and letters, yet the teacher infused each exercise with narrative, imagery, or problem-solving. Stories of Roman gods, heroes, or recent civic events were interwoven seamlessly with drills, capturing imagination while reinforcing comprehension and memory. Students repeated letters and syllables, traced characters on wax, and recited aloud, sometimes faltering, sometimes excelling, each misstep an opportunity for guidance, reflection, and encouragement. The teacher moved among them, observing posture, handwriting, and concentration, correcting errors subtly, praising effort, and ensuring that learning remained both structured and dynamic, a combination of repetition and discovery. Arithmetic followed, grounded in practical examples. Pebbles, coins, or pieces of wax became tools to simulate commerce, ration distribution, or measurement for construction projects, illustrating abstract numbers through real-world application. Some students grasped concepts quickly, others required repetition, creative analogies, or story-based exercises to understand. The teacher adapted fluidly, transforming calculations into imaginative challenges, linking numerical understanding to trade, civic duty, and daily life. In doing so, abstract figures were made meaningful, learning became active, and students experienced both mental challenge and tangible application. Meals remained modest but essential, offering sustenance, observation, and opportunity for social learning. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit were consumed amid conversation, laughter, and storytelling. Students shared tales of family life, minor adventures in the neighborhood, or gossip overheard in markets or temples. The teacher listened closely, observing temperament, curiosity, and social interaction, sometimes weaving these narratives into lessons to illustrate ethical dilemmas, civic responsibility, or historical context. These intervals, brief as they were, reinforced social understanding, encouraged reflection, and allowed informal learning to complement structured instruction. Afternoons presented both challenge and opportunity. Fatigue built, attention waned, and small quarrels emerged. A dispute over a stylus, a whispered disagreement, or an attempt to copy a neighbor's work required careful intervention. Discipline was firm but measured. The teacher guided reflection, instilled self-control, and taught fairness without shaming, allowing students to internalize lessons in ethics and social conduct. At the same time, instruction often shifted fluidly, transforming arithmetic into story problems, grammar exercises into ethical debates, or reading drills into imaginative explorations of historical or mythological events. The teacher's improvisation ensured sustained engagement, critical thinking, and moral development while maintaining a dynamic classroom atmosphere. Interactions with families and patrons subtly influenced instruction. Some children arrived with extra supplies, lessons reinforced by attentive parents, or expectations shaped by household status, while others had fewer resources or less parental involvement. The teacher navigated these differences with care, balancing encouragement, fairness, and opportunity. Discussions occasionally extended beyond the classroom. Parents asked advice about behavior, reading, or arithmetic, and the teacher provided counsel grounded in observation, experience, and subtle insight into both individual character and social dynamics. These interactions enriched understanding, facilitated tailored instruction, and highlighted the role of social context in education. Evenings offered reflection, preparation, and quiet observation of the city. Walking home through lantern-lit streets, the teacher noted families gathering for dinner, merchants closing stalls, and performers entertaining passers-by. Conversations, minor disputes, or displays of generosity provided material for future lessons, illustrating ethics, civility, and human behavior. Dinner at home was simple: bread, vegetables, occasional cheese, but served as a period for planning, reading, or discussing events with colleagues. Festivals and religious rituals punctuated life, offering both entertainment and cultural instruction. Tales of gods, civic heroes, or historical figures became classroom stories that reinforced morals, civic awareness, and cultural literacy, bridging formal learning with lived experience. Even in repetition, subtle pleasures emerged: a student's sudden comprehension, the quiet resolution of conflict, or the satisfaction of a lesson successfully concluded. The teacher observed, adapted, and guided, weaving small victories into a larger pattern of intellectual, moral, and social growth. Each day, writing, calculating, storytelling, or reflecting was a thread in a living tapestry, binding individual development, classroom dynamics, and the rhythms of Roman life into a continuous, intricate, and endlessly fascinating narrative of education, society, and human experience. The day began with the soft glow of sunlight spilling into the streets, illuminating the worn stones and the bustling market stalls where merchants called out their wares with practiced urgency, the smell of fresh bread and olives mingling with the tang of metal from nearby workshops. The teacher moved along familiar paths, observing the rhythms of the city, A courier darting through the crowd with scrolls bundled tightly, a child chasing after a loose dog, or the fleeting shadow of a senator's carriage gliding past. Each fragment of life was a subtle lesson in human behavior, commerce, and civic awareness, waiting to be woven into the day's instruction. Upon entering the classroom, the teacher greeted each student with careful attention, noting small changes: a newly polished tunic hinting at a recent family celebration, a scrape on an arm suggesting yesterday's adventures, or the eager curiosity in a student's eyes sparked by something overheard at the forum or in the marketplace. The room filled gradually with wax tablets, styluses, and parchment, the murmurs and shuffles of children creating a dynamic prelude to the lessons to come. The teacher's eyes scanned the group, silently assessing energy, temperament, and focus, preparing to adapt instruction fluidly to the shifting moods and attention spans of the pupils. Lessons began with letters, syllables, and writing exercises, yet even these foundational tasks were transformed through narrative and imagination. The teacher traced characters in the air, illustrating form, rhythm, and pronunciation, while weaving in brief stories of gods, heroes, or recent civic events. Students repeated letters and words aloud, sometimes hesitating, sometimes racing ahead, their mistakes becoming subtle opportunities for guidance, reflection, and encouragement. Every correction, every demonstration of skill reinforced both comprehension and confidence, shaping the classroom into a space where learning was alive, responsive, and deeply intertwined with narrative and curiosity. Arithmetic followed, rooted in practical application rather than abstract formula. Pebbles, small coins, and pieces of wax became tools for simulating trade, rationing, or the calculation of construction needs, transforming numbers into living exercises connected to daily life. Some students excelled quickly, faces lighting with comprehension, while others struggled, requiring patient repetition, creative examples, or imaginative storytelling to illustrate concepts. The teacher adapted continuously, crafting exercises that combined intellectual challenge with practical relevance, ensuring that arithmetic remained engaging, meaningful, and connected to real-world scenarios. Meals punctuated the day, simple yet rich in social learning. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit were accompanied by conversation, laughter, and storytelling as students shared fragments of home life, neighborhood events, or tales overheard in markets, temples, or streets. The teacher listened closely, observing social patterns, temperament, and curiosity, occasionally weaving these details into lessons or moral discussions, subtly reinforcing ethics, empathy, and understanding of human behavior. These small interactions, though informal, were integral to the learning process, connecting structured instruction with lived experience. Afternoons presented both fatigue and opportunity. Restlessness grew, minor conflicts emerged, and attention wavered. The teacher guided these moments with subtle discipline, a gentle correction here, an ethical lesson there, fostering self-control, fairness, and reflection. Lessons sometimes shifted spontaneously. Arithmetic became a narrative problem about merchants, grammar exercises evolved into discussions about civic responsibility, and reading exercises transformed into explorations of historical events or mythological dilemmas. These shifts kept engagement high, curiosity active, and thinking flexible, blending intellectual, moral, and imaginative development seamlessly. The dynamics among students were complex and revealing. Friendships, rivalries, and informal hierarchies shaped classroom interaction, influencing behavior, participation, and motivation. Some pupils sought recognition, eager to display skill, accuracy, or creativity, while others observed quietly, learning through reflection and imitation. The teacher navigated these dynamics with care, guiding cooperation, fostering empathy, and turning competition into constructive engagement, ensuring that social learning complemented academic instruction. Interactions with families and patrons subtly influenced the classroom. Some children benefited from extra resources, parental attention, or social expectation, while others came with fewer means or less support. The teacher balanced these differences, offering encouragement, reinforcement, and guidance to all, shaping equitable access to knowledge and opportunity. Parents occasionally consulted the teacher on behavior, literacy, or arithmetic, and these exchanges provided further insight into individual student needs, family dynamics, and social context, enriching instruction and understanding. Evenings offered moments of reflection and observation. Walking through streets dimly lit by lanterns, the teacher noted families gathering for supper, merchants closing shops, and performers entertaining passers-by, all forming a living panorama of Roman life. Dinner at home was simple yet sufficient: bread, vegetables, cheese, but evenings were filled with lesson preparation, reading, and quiet conversation with colleagues or friends. Festivals, religious observances, and civic celebrations punctuated the calendar, providing rich material for classroom storytelling and ethical discussion, grounding lessons in culture, morality, and communal experience. Despite repetition, each day held subtle discoveries and rewards. A student mastering a difficult letter, resolving a dispute fairly, or understanding a complex concept. The teacher observed, guided, and celebrated these moments, weaving them into the larger tapestry of learning, social growth, and civic awareness. The life of a Roman teacher was dense with effort, observation, and subtle pleasure, each day a thread in the enduring story of education, social engagement, and the vibrant rhythms of Rome itself. Every exercise, every interaction, and every observation contributed to the slow but steady cultivation of both young minds and the teacher's own understanding of the intricate world in which they lived. The morning light arrived gradually, spilling into the narrow streets of the city, reflecting off the red and ochre rooftops and glinting against the polished bronze of market signs, while the distant clamor of merchants, the sharp clang of the blacksmith, and the laughter of children combined into a living symphony that accompanied the teacher on his walk. Each street, each passerby, each fragment of daily life was a lesson in itself. A child chasing after a runaway dog, a baker lifting steaming loaves from the oven, or a senator's carriage gliding past with servants holding open doors, all forming a vibrant tableau of civic rhythm and human interaction that could be woven into the fabric of classroom teaching. Entering the classroom, the teacher greeted each student with careful attention, noting minute changes in mood, appearance, or behavior. A boy's new tunic suggested recent familial attention or a small gift. A girl's hesitant movements hinted at fatigue from yesterday's errands or a personal challenge. Another student's bright curiosity indicated an early morning observation in the forum or marketplace. Wax tablets, styluses, and parchment were laid upon desks, the shuffling and murmurs of pupils filling the air with a quiet energy that promised both chaos and discovery. The teacher moved among them, eyes scanning each face, anticipating the ebb and flow of focus and engagement, ready to adapt lessons to the moment's demands. Writing exercises began as usual, tracing letters, syllables, and words upon wax tablets. But even the most routine tasks were enlivened through narrative and imagination. The teacher would illustrate the shape of a letter with a story, perhaps of a god, a soldier, or a civic hero, capturing attention while reinforcing comprehension. Students recited aloud, their voices rising and falling, sometimes faltering, sometimes racing ahead, mistakes offering subtle opportunities for correction, reflection, and encouragement. These interactions were never simply mechanical. They were embedded in dialogue, attention, and shared experience, shaping literacy while cultivating confidence and curiosity. Arithmetic followed, grounded in scenarios that transformed numbers into practical tools. Pebbles, coins, or scraps of wax became counters for trade, allocation, or measurement, illustrating commerce, rationing, or construction. Some pupils grasped concepts quickly, their faces alight with comprehension. Others struggled, requiring patient repetition, inventive examples, or narrative reinforcement. The teacher adapted fluidly, embedding problems in stories of merchants, soldiers, or civic officials, ensuring numbers became meaningful, learning remained engaging, and concepts connected to the broader world of Roman life. Meals punctuated the day, modest yet socially and intellectually valuable. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit nourished the body while conversation nourished observation, reflection, and social learning. Students shared snippets of family life, market rumors, or festival preparations, offering insight into temperament, curiosity, and social understanding. The teacher listened attentively, sometimes integrating these narratives into lessons, illustrating ethical dilemmas, civic responsibility, or historical precedent, allowing informal learning to enrich structured instruction. Afternoons demanded improvisation and patience. Energy waned, restlessness increased, and minor conflicts arose. Disputes over materials, whispers of gossip, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. Discipline was measured yet firm, teaching fairness, patience, and self-awareness without humiliation. Instruction shifted fluidly. Arithmetic became a story problem about ration distribution, grammar exercises evolved into debates about civic duties, and reading drills transformed into explorations of myth, history, or morality. The teacher's adaptability kept engagement high, curiosity alive, and thinking flexible, blending intellectual, social, and ethical development. Social dynamics within the classroom were intricate. Friendships, rivalries, and alliances shaped behavior, attention, and motivation. Some students sought recognition through rapid answers or precise work. Others observed, reflecting quietly and learning through imitation. Minor disputes, competition, or jealousy became tools for teaching negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher navigated these interactions carefully, fostering both individual growth and communal harmony, ensuring that academic, social, and moral lessons were interwoven. Family background and social status subtly influenced learning. Children of affluent households arrived with extra resources, parental guidance, or expectations shaped by social rank, while those from modest homes had fewer materials or less supervision. The teacher balanced instruction with sensitivity, offering encouragement, tailored guidance, and equitable opportunity. Occasional parental consultations provided additional context, revealing temperament, ambitions, and household values, enriching understanding and enabling more effective instruction. Evenings were for reflection, preparation, and observation of the city. Walking through lantern-lit streets, the teacher noted families gathering for supper, merchants closing shops, and performers entertaining passers-by. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and civic celebrations punctuated the calendar, offering vivid examples for classroom storytelling and ethical discussion. Tales of gods, heroes, and civic figures became rich narrative material, reinforcing morals, civic understanding, and cultural literacy. Despite the apparent repetition of routine, subtle victories occurred daily. A child mastering a letter, resolving a dispute, or grasping a complex concept. These moments, quietly observed and sometimes celebrated, were integral to the rhythm of teaching. The life of a Roman educator was dense with observation, adaptation, and small triumphs, a continuous weaving of student development, civic awareness, and cultural immersion. Every lesson, every interaction, and every observation added to a living tapestry, connecting the teacher's efforts with the enduring pulse of Rome, shaping both young minds and the teacher's own understanding of a world brimming with nuance, challenge, and subtle delight. The morning arrived gradually, the sun's rays slanting between buildings, casting warm light across the uneven streets where merchants were already arranging their goods, bakers lifted steaming loaves from ovens, and the sharp clang of the blacksmith echoed faintly in the distance. The teacher moved along familiar paths, absorbing the sights, sounds, and subtle rhythms of the city, each detail a potential lesson in observation, human behavior, or civic knowledge. Children played in the streets, sometimes chasing stray animals, sometimes mimicking soldiers or citizens they had seen in the forum, their movements a chaotic but fascinating reflection of daily life that could later be woven into lessons about morality, leadership, or practical skills. Entering the classroom, the teacher greeted each pupil, noting minute changes: a girl with a brightly colored ribbon, likely a gift from a parent; a boy rubbing a scraped elbow, evidence of yesterday's outdoor play; a student whose eyes held the sparkle of recent discovery or curiosity sparked by a market or temple observation. Wax tablets and styluses were laid out, murmurs and the rustle of parchment filling the room, a prelude to the day's intricate choreography of learning. The teacher scanned faces, assessing focus, energy, and temperament, preparing to adapt lessons fluidly to the ebb and flow of attention, social interaction, and intellectual engagement. Writing and literacy exercises began with letters, syllables, and short words, yet even these foundational drills were enlivened by storytelling, imagination, and narrative integration. The teacher traced letters in the air, demonstrated proper formation, and illustrated the sounds with anecdotes about gods, soldiers, or civic heroes, capturing attention while reinforcing comprehension. Students recited aloud, sometimes faltering, sometimes racing ahead, mistakes offering subtle opportunities for correction and guidance. Encouragement and gentle correction were as much a part of the lesson as the letters themselves, teaching diligence, confidence, and curiosity. Arithmetic followed, firmly rooted in practical applications. Pebbles, small coins, and pieces of wax became counters for trade, rationing, or planning construction, transforming abstract numbers into tangible experiences. Some pupils excelled quickly, faces bright with understanding, while others required patient repetition, inventive analogies, or narrative reinforcement to grasp the concept. The teacher continuously adapted exercises, connecting numerical problems to civic, commercial, or domestic scenarios, ensuring lessons were engaging, relevant, and practically meaningful. Meals offered small but significant moments for both sustenance and social learning. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit were consumed while children shared stories of family life, minor adventures, market rumors, or preparations for local festivals. The teacher listened attentively, observing temperament, curiosity, and social skills, occasionally integrating these narratives into classroom discussion. Ethical lessons, civic responsibility, and reflection on human behavior were subtly reinforced, blending informal observation with structured instruction to enrich both intellectual and social development. Afternoons required both patience and creativity. Energy waned, attention drifted, and minor conflicts arose. Disputes over styluses, whispered disagreements, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. The teacher guided these moments carefully, teaching fairness, self-control, and ethical reasoning without humiliation, turning potential disruption into opportunities for social learning. Lessons shifted organically. Arithmetic problems became scenarios about ration distribution or trade, grammar exercises evolved into discussions of civic duty, and reading drills transformed into explorations of mythology, history, or morality. Improvisation kept engagement high, curiosity alive, and thinking flexible, while reinforcing both intellectual and ethical growth. Social hierarchies within the classroom were subtle yet influential. Friendships, rivalries, and alliances shaped attention, participation, and motivation. Some pupils competed for recognition, eager to demonstrate skill, accuracy, or creativity. Others observed quietly, learning through reflection or imitation. Minor disputes, jealousy, or informal competitions became tools for teaching negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher navigated these dynamics with care, ensuring both individual growth and communal harmony, blending social, moral, and academic instruction seamlessly. Family influence and social status subtly impacted learning. Children from affluent households often arrived with extra supplies, parental guidance, and heightened expectations, while those from modest backgrounds had fewer resources or less direct supervision. The teacher balanced instruction carefully, providing encouragement, equitable guidance, and tailored attention, fostering both opportunity and fairness. Occasional conversations with parents or patrons offered insight into temperament, ambition, and household values, enriching understanding and informing future instruction. Evenings brought reflection and observation. Walking through lantern-lit streets, the teacher noted families gathering for supper, merchants closing their stalls, and performers entertaining passers-by. Civic celebrations, religious ceremonies, and festivals punctuated the calendar, providing vivid examples for storytelling and ethical lessons. Tales of gods, civic leaders, or historical events became classroom material, reinforcing morality, civic awareness, and cultural literacy. Even in the rhythm of routine, subtle triumphs occurred daily. A student mastering a letter, resolving a conflict fairly, or grasping a complex concept. The teacher observed, guided, and celebrated these moments, weaving them into the larger pattern of intellectual, social, and moral development. Life as a Roman educator was dense, continuous, and layered with observation, adaptation, and quiet reward, a living tapestry of teaching, civic awareness, and cultural immersion. Each day's lessons, interactions, and reflections were threads in the enduring story of Rome, shaping both young minds and the teacher's own understanding of a world filled with complexity, challenge, and subtle, enduring beauty. The city woke slowly, the sun's early rays painting the rooftops with gold while the streets filled with a rising murmur of activity. Merchants called out their wares, bakers lifted steaming loaves from their ovens, and the distant clatter of a blacksmith's hammer marked the rhythm of work, all blending into the soundtrack of daily life. The teacher walked along familiar streets, observing every detail: children chasing stray dogs, apprentices carrying bundles of cloth, and citizens hurrying to appointments or errands. Each moment offered material for lessons, examples to weave into stories, moral discussions, or practical exercises for students, keeping the curriculum rooted in the vibrant pulse of the city. In the classroom, the teacher greeted each pupil individually, noting subtle changes from the previous day. A boy's tunic was slightly dirted from morning play, a girl's hair was carefully braided, perhaps reflecting parental instruction, and the spark of curiosity in another child suggested a recent encounter with some event or observation in the forum. Wax tablets were laid on desks, styluses and parchment prepared, and the gentle murmur of students became a prelude to the day's intricate orchestration of learning, social navigation, and subtle guidance. The teacher's eyes scanned the room, anticipating moments of enthusiasm, fatigue, or mischief, ready to adapt instruction to the needs of the moment. Writing and literacy exercises began as always, tracing letters, syllables, and simple words, yet each task was enriched with narrative, imagery, and historical context. Letters were illustrated through short stories of gods, soldiers, merchants, or civic heroes, capturing attention while reinforcing skill. Students recited aloud, sometimes hesitating, sometimes rushing ahead, each error a subtle opportunity for correction, encouragement, and reflection. The teacher moved among them, adjusting posture, guiding hands, and nurturing confidence, creating a classroom environment where learning was a living, responsive process rather than rote repetition. Arithmetic followed, grounded in practical and imaginative scenarios. Pebbles, small coins, or pieces of wax became tools to simulate trade, rationing, or construction planning. Some students grasped concepts rapidly, their expressions bright with understanding, while others required patient repetition, creative explanation, or story-based reinforcement. The teacher continuously adapted, embedding lessons in narratives of merchants, soldiers, or civic administration, ensuring that abstract numbers gained tangible significance. Engagement remained high, and comprehension was both practical and enduring. Meals punctuated the day, modest but socially and educationally meaningful. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit sustained the body, while conversation and storytelling nourished social awareness. Students shared tales of family life, neighborhood gossip, market rumors, or festival preparations. The teacher listened attentively, observing personalities, social skills, and temperament, integrating these insights into lessons on ethics, civic duty, and interpersonal conduct. Informal moments of conversation subtly reinforced structured instruction, providing a holistic approach to education that bridged learning, observation, and reflection. Afternoons demanded adaptability. Energy waned, attention drifted, and minor disputes emerged. Arguments over styluses, whispered conversations, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. Discipline was applied judiciously, guiding students toward fairness, self-control, and reflection without humiliation. Lessons often shifted spontaneously. Arithmetic exercises became story problems about ration distribution or trade, grammar exercises evolved into debates on civic duty or ethics, and reading exercises expanded into explorations of history, myth, or morality. Improvisation maintained engagement, cultivated curiosity, and developed flexible thinking, blending academic, social, and moral growth. The classroom's social dynamics were intricate. Friendships, rivalries, and informal hierarchies shaped interaction, attention, and motivation. Some students sought recognition through quick answers, neat work, or creative contributions, while others learned quietly, observing and reflecting. Minor disputes, jealousy, or informal competitions became opportunities to teach negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher navigated these dynamics carefully, fostering both individual growth and communal harmony, ensuring that academic, social, and ethical lessons were integrated seamlessly. Family influence and social rank subtly affected education. Children from affluent households arrived with resources, guidance, and elevated expectations, while those from modest homes had fewer materials or parental involvement. The teacher balanced instruction carefully, offering tailored encouragement and equitable guidance to all, ensuring opportunity despite circumstance. Occasional discussions with parents or patrons revealed temperament, ambition, and household values, enriching understanding and informing teaching strategies. Evenings were moments of quiet reflection, preparation, and observation. Walking through lantern-lit streets, the teacher noted families gathering for dinner, merchants closing shops, and performers entertaining passers-by. Festivals, religious observances, and civic celebrations provided rich material for lessons. Stories of gods, heroes, and civic leaders became classroom tools for ethical discussion, civic awareness, and cultural literacy. Despite routine, subtle victories occurred daily. A child mastering a letter, resolving a conflict, or understanding a complex concept. Each success was woven into the larger tapestry of intellectual, social, and moral development. The life of a Roman teacher was dense, continuous, and layered, a balance of observation, adaptation, and quiet reward, connecting students, civic life, and culture into an ongoing narrative. Every lesson, every interaction, and every observation contributed to the enduring story of Rome, shaping young minds while deepening the teacher's own understanding of a world rich with complexity, challenge, and enduring fascination. The city streets were alive with anticipation as the morning sun rose higher, casting warm light on the stone facades and illuminating the colorful fabrics of market stalls. The distant clamor of merchants, the rhythmic pounding of hammers from workshops, and the playful shouts of children chasing stray dogs or playing impromptu games created a symphony of everyday life that the teacher absorbed with practiced attention. Each detail, a hurried courier delivering scrolls, a baker pulling fresh bread from the oven, a senator's carriage gliding past with servants holding doors, was a potential story, a lesson, or a moral woven into the fabric of education, connecting classroom exercises with the bustling rhythms of the city. Entering the classroom, the teacher noted subtle shifts among students. A boy with ink stains on his fingers from last evening's practice, a girl whose eyes held curiosity sparked by a festival announcement, another pupil whispering about a recent encounter in the forum. Wax tablets, styluses, and parchment were arranged on desks, while the gentle murmur of students provided the prelude to the day's intricate choreography of learning, social interaction, and subtle guidance. The teacher's gaze swept across the room, anticipating moments of attention, distraction, or mischief, ready to adapt the lessons dynamically to the personalities and energy levels present. Writing exercises began with letters, syllables, and words, but even these routine drills were infused with narrative and imagination. Letters were traced in the air, illustrated with stories of gods, soldiers, merchants, or civic heroes, drawing attention while reinforcing comprehension. Students recited aloud, some hesitating, others racing ahead, mistakes serving as opportunities for guidance, correction, and encouragement. The teacher moved among them, adjusting posture, guiding hands, and nurturing confidence, ensuring that literacy was both skill and engagement, imagination and discipline intertwined. Arithmetic followed, rooted in practical scenarios. Pebbles, coins, and pieces of wax were transformed into counters for trade, rationing, or construction planning, turning abstract numbers into tangible experiences. Some students mastered concepts quickly, eyes lighting with understanding, while others required patient repetition, creative analogies, or story-based reinforcement. The teacher adapted continuously, embedding lessons in narratives of merchants, soldiers, or civic administration, ensuring that numbers became meaningful, engagement remained high, and comprehension endured. Meals offered nourishment both physical and social. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit were consumed while students shared tales of family life, neighborhood happenings, or festival preparations. The teacher listened attentively, observing temperament, social skill, and curiosity, sometimes integrating these stories into lessons on ethics, civic responsibility, or interpersonal conduct. Informal conversations bridged structured instruction, creating a holistic educational experience that blended observation, reflection, and social development. The classroom's social dynamics were intricate. Friendships, rivalries, and informal hierarchies shaped attention, participation, and motivation. Some pupils competed for recognition through rapid answers, neat handwriting, or creative contributions. Others observed quietly, learning through reflection and imitation. Minor disputes, jealousy, or informal competitions became lessons in negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher navigated these interactions carefully, fostering both individual growth and communal harmony, integrating academic, social, and moral instruction seamlessly. Family background and social status subtly influenced instruction. Children of wealthier households arrived with extra resources, parental guidance, and elevated expectations, while those from modest homes had fewer materials or less supervision. The teacher balanced attention and guidance, offering equitable encouragement to all, ensuring opportunity despite circumstance. Occasional conversations with parents or patrons revealed temperament, ambition, and household values, informing instructional choices and providing insight into social dynamics. Afternoons required both patience and improvisation. Energy waned, attention drifted, and minor conflicts emerged, disputes over styluses, whispered arguments, or attempts to copy peers' work. Discipline was firm but measured, teaching fairness, self-control, and ethical reasoning without humiliation. Lessons shifted organically. Arithmetic became narrative problems about trade, grammar exercises evolved into discussions of civic duty, and reading drills transformed into explorations of mythology, history, or morality. Improvisation maintained engagement, curiosity, and flexible thinking, blending intellectual, social, and moral growth seamlessly. Seasonal festivals and public events punctuated the rhythm of life, offering extraordinary material for lessons. Children returned from visits to temples or civic celebrations filled with stories, colors, music, and excitement. These experiences became narrative fuel. The teacher wove them into writing exercises, moral discussions, and imaginative storytelling, connecting cultural literacy with practical, ethical, and intellectual instruction. Students learn not only letters and numbers but also rhythm, ritual, civic pride, and moral reasoning, experiencing education as a living, cultural tapestry. Evenings provided reflection and preparation. Walking through lantern-lit streets, the teacher observed families gathering for supper, merchants closing their shops, and performers entertaining the crowd. The city's pulse, in its noise, color, and movement, became a resource, a living textbook from which to draw examples for lessons, discussions, and narrative enrichment. Despite the routine, subtle victories occurred daily. A child mastering a letter, resolving a conflict, or grasping a complex concept. Each triumph, however minor, contributed to the teacher's sense of purpose, the student's growth, and the enduring continuity of education in the vibrant life of Rome. The streets of Rome stirred with the soft golden light of early morning, the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the bakeries while the rhythmic pounding of the blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly from the workshops. Merchants called out the day's wares, children chased each other through alleys, and citizens hurried to appointments or errands, each fragment of city life a lesson in observation, rhythm, and human behavior. The teacher walked deliberately along familiar paths, absorbing these details, considering how they might later be woven into lessons about commerce, civility, or practical skills, always aware that the city itself was an unending classroom. Entering the school, the teacher greeted each pupil, noting subtle changes in mood, appearance, and attention. A boy's fingers bore traces of ink from evening practice, a girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity following a recent festival, and another student whispered excitedly about events overheard at the forum. Wax tablets, styluses, and parchment were carefully arranged on desks while the low murmur of conversation filled the room, signaling both anticipation and potential chaos. The teacher's eyes scanned the group, anticipating moments of focus, fatigue, or mischief, ready to adjust instruction dynamically to the personalities and energy levels present. Writing exercises began, tracing letters, syllables, and simple words, yet each task was enlivened with narrative, mythology, and historical examples. Letters were illustrated with stories of gods, soldiers, merchants, or civic heroes, capturing attention while reinforcing comprehension. Students recited aloud, sometimes hesitating, other times racing ahead, mistakes serving as opportunities for correction and encouragement. The teacher moved among them, adjusting posture, guiding hands, and nurturing confidence, turning literacy into an engaging, living practice intertwined with imagination and reflection. Arithmetic followed, grounded in practical scenarios. Pebbles, coins, and pieces of wax became counters for trade, rationing, or construction planning, transforming abstract numbers into tangible, relatable experiences. Some pupils mastered concepts quickly, their faces bright with understanding, while others required patient repetition, inventive analogies, or narrative reinforcement. The teacher adapted fluidly, embedding lessons in stories of merchants, soldiers, or civic administration, ensuring numbers gained meaning, engagement remained high, and comprehension endured. Meals punctuated the day, modest yet socially significant. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit nourished bodies while conversation and storytelling nurtured social understanding. Students shared anecdotes from home, neighborhood events, or festival preparations. The teacher listened attentively, observing temperament, curiosity, and social skill, occasionally weaving these narratives into ethical discussions or lessons on civic responsibility. These informal moments complemented structured instruction, creating a holistic educational experience that blended observation, reflection, and moral development. Afternoons demanded improvisation and patience. Energy waned, attention drifted, and minor disputes emerged. Disagreements over styluses, whispered conversations, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. Discipline was firm but measured, teaching fairness, self-control, and reflection without humiliation. Lessons often shifted spontaneously. Arithmetic exercises became trade problems, grammar exercises evolved into discussions of civic duty, and reading drills transformed into explorations of history, mythology, or moral reasoning. Improvisation maintained engagement, cultivated curiosity, and developed flexible thinking, integrating intellectual, social, and ethical growth. The classroom's social dynamics were intricate. Friendships, rivalries, and informal hierarchies influenced attention, participation, and motivation. Some pupils competed for recognition through quick answers, neat work, or creative contributions, while others learned quietly, observing and reflecting. Minor conflicts, jealousy, or informal competitions became lessons in negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher navigated these dynamics carefully, fostering both individual growth and communal harmony, blending academic, social, and moral instruction seamlessly. Family influence and social status subtly shaped learning. Children from affluent households arrived with additional resources, parental guidance, and heightened expectations, while those from more modest homes had fewer materials or less oversight. The teacher balanced instruction with sensitivity, providing encouragement and tailored guidance, ensuring equitable opportunity. Occasional conversations with parents or patrons revealed temperament, ambition, and household values, enriching understanding and informing teaching strategies. Excursions beyond the classroom brought vivid lessons. Trips to the forum, temples, or nearby workshops allowed students to observe civic processes, religious rituals, and commercial activity firsthand. The teacher used these experiences to anchor instruction, illustrating moral reasoning, civic duty, commerce, and practical skills. Students returned with stories, questions, and excitement, which were seamlessly woven into subsequent lessons, reinforcing learning while connecting education to lived experience. Evenings were a time for reflection and preparation. Walking along lantern-lit streets, The teacher observed families gathering for supper, merchants closing their shops, and performers entertaining passers-by. Civic celebrations, religious ceremonies, and festivals offered rich material for storytelling, ethical discussion, and cultural literacy. Despite the routine, small victories occurred daily. A student mastering a letter, resolving a dispute, or grasping a complex concept. Each success contributed to the larger tapestry of education, blending classroom instruction with city life and culture, illustrating the dense, continuous, and layered nature of a teacher's life in Rome, where every interaction, lesson, and observation was part of an enduring narrative. The morning streets of Rome were already alive, the first light of day glinting on the polished bronze of signposts, reflecting off the red-tiled rooftops and casting long shadows across the uneven stone pavement. Merchants arranged their wares in colorful displays, bakers pulled steaming loaves from ovens, and the distant clanging of hammers from workshops set a rhythmic undertone to the city's pulse. Children darted between stalls, some chasing dogs, others imitating soldiers they had glimpsed at the forum, and citizens hurried past, engaged in their business. Every detail of this daily chaos was absorbed by the teacher with quiet attentiveness, each a potential lesson in commerce, civic awareness, morality, or human behavior, ready to be woven into classroom instruction. Upon entering the school, the teacher observed subtle changes in students. A boy with a smear of ink on his fingers from last night's practice, a girl whose eyes sparkled with excitement after hearing news of a festival, and a quiet pupil whispering about recent events in the marketplace. Wax tablets, styluses, and parchment were arranged on desks, and the low murmur of students filled the room, signaling anticipation and potential mischief alike. The teacher's gaze swept across the classroom, anticipating moments of attention, distraction, or energy bursts, prepared to adjust lessons dynamically according to the personalities present. Writing exercises began, tracing letters, syllables, and short words, but even these foundational drills were enlivened with stories, mythology, and historical examples. Letters were illustrated through anecdotes about gods, soldiers, merchants, and civic heroes, captivating attention while reinforcing skill. Students recited aloud, some hesitating, others rushing ahead, mistakes offering opportunities for guidance, correction, and encouragement. The teacher moved among them, adjusting posture, guiding hands, and nurturing confidence, turning literacy into an interactive, imaginative process rather than rote repetition. Arithmetic followed, grounded in practical application. Pebbles, coins, and scraps of wax became tools to simulate trade, rationing, or construction planning, transforming abstract numbers into tangible experience. Some students mastered concepts quickly, faces lighting up with comprehension, while others required patient repetition, inventive analogies, or story-based reinforcement. The teacher continually adapted, embedding lessons within narratives of merchants, soldiers, or civic administration, ensuring that numbers gained context, engagement remained high, and comprehension endured. Meals offered sustenance and a chance for social observation. Bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit were eaten while students shared stories of family life, neighborhood gossip, or festival preparations. The teacher listened attentively, observing temperament, curiosity, and social aptitude, occasionally integrating these narratives into ethical discussions or lessons on civic responsibility. Informal conversation bridged structured instruction, blending observation, reflection, and moral development, cultivating both intellect and social skill. Afternoons demanded improvisation. Energy waned, attention drifted, and minor disputes emerged. Disagreements over styluses, whispered arguments, or attempts to copy a neighbor's work. Discipline was firm but measured, teaching fairness, self-control, and ethical reflection without humiliation. Lessons shifted organically. Arithmetic exercises became story problems about trade or rationing, grammar exercises evolved into discussions of civic duty, and reading drills transformed into explorations of history, mythology, or morality. Improvisation maintained engagement, cultivated curiosity, and developed flexible thinking, blending intellectual, social, and moral growth seamlessly. The social dynamics of the classroom were complex. Friendships, rivalries, and informal hierarchies shaped attention, participation, and motivation. Some students competed for recognition through quick answers, neat work, or creative contributions, while others observed quietly, reflecting and imitating. Minor conflicts, jealousy, or informal competition became opportunities to teach negotiation, empathy, and cooperation. The teacher guided these interactions carefully, ensuring individual growth and communal harmony, integrating academic, social, and moral instruction in an interconnected whole. Family influence and social rank subtly affected learning. Children from affluent households arrived with extra resources, guidance, and heightened expectations, while those from modest backgrounds had fewer materials or less supervision. The teacher balanced instruction thoughtfully, providing encouragement and tailored guidance to all, ensuring equitable opportunity. Occasional consultations with parents or patrons revealed temperament, ambition, and household values, enriching the teacher's understanding and informing pedagogical choices. Seasonal festivals and public events punctuated the rhythm of life, offering extraordinary lessons. Students returned from temple visits or civic celebrations filled with stories, colors, music, and excitement. The teacher wove these experiences into writing exercises, moral discussion, and imaginative storytelling, connecting cultural literacy with practical and ethical education. Students learned not only letters and numbers but also rhythm, ritual, civic pride, and moral reasoning, experiencing education as an integrated, living tapestry of culture and intellect. Evenings allowed quiet reflection. Walking through streets lit by lanterns, the teacher observed families gathering for supper, merchants closing their stalls, and street performers entertaining the crowds. Civic ceremonies, religious observances, and festivals provided material for future lessons, grounding education in lived experience and cultural awareness. Despite the routine, small victories occurred daily. A child mastering a difficult letter, resolving a conflict, or grasping a complex concept. Each success, however subtle, contributed to the larger tapestry of intellectual, social, and moral growth. The life of a Roman teacher was continuous, dense, and layered, every lesson, interaction, and observation part of an enduring story, intertwining the city's pulse with the slow, deliberate shaping of young minds and the teacher's own understanding of the world's complexity and vibrancy.